Nathaniel Carter had spent years building Kingston Properties from the ground up. He had poured his heart into this company, turning it into one of the most successful real estate firms in the country. But as the company expanded and new management took over, whispers of toxic leadership, workplace discrimination, and unethical behavior had reached his ears. He could have ignored them, brushed them off as office gossip, but Nathaniel was not the kind of man who led from a distance. He believed in leadership by example, in seeing the truth for himself. And so, he devised a plan, one that would reveal the true nature of his employees and expose those who had been tarnishing the company's reputation. That morning, he didn't step into his office as the CEO. He walked through the doors of Kingston Properties as someone else entirely. His tailored suits were gone, replaced with worn jeans, a faded hoodie, and a janitor's uniform that bore the name Nate. His polished shoes were swapped for scuffed sneakers, and his usual air of authority was hidden beneath a quiet, unassuming demeanor. No one recognized him as the man whose name was on their paychecks. Instead, they saw only what they wanted to see. A black man in a janitor's uniform, someone they deemed unimportant. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the shift in the air. Employees who once greeted him with forced smiles now walked past him without a second glance. Some eyed him with quiet disdain, others didn't acknowledge him at all. The break room was filled with professionals sipping on their morning coffee, discussing market trends, and laughing about weekend plans. When Nathaniel entered with a mop in hand, the conversations quieted. A few employees exchanged amused glances, then went back to ignoring him. The first test of character came quicker than expected. As he wiped down a table, a senior executive, Richard Coleman, strolled in and took one look at him before scoffing. Without hesitation, Richard knocked over his half-full coffee cup, spilling dark liquid across the freshly cleaned surface. "Oops," Richard said, smirking. "Better clean that up." Nathaniel met his gaze, searching for any hint of remorse, but there was none. He nodded silently, grabbed a rag, and wiped up the mess without complaint. He didn't react, not yet. This wasn't just about one man's cruelty. It was about how the rest of the room reacted. A few employees chuckled under their breath. Others simply turned away, pretending they hadn't seen what had just happened. Not a single person spoke up. That moment told Nathaniel everything he needed to know about the culture inside his own company. It wasn't just Richard. It was the silent acceptance of disrespect, the normalization of arrogance and elitism. Later that afternoon, as he cleaned the hallway near the executive offices, another test presented itself. A receptionist approached him, holding a folder of documents. She barely looked at him as she shoved them into his hands. "Make yourself useful," she said dismissively. "Take these upstairs." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Isn't that part of your job?" he asked calmly. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And cleaning floors is yours." Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, taking in the reality of what his employees had become. He had always envisioned Kingston Properties as a place of growth, respect, and opportunity, a company built on hard work and fairness. But this was something else entirely. That night, as he sat in his modest hotel room reflecting on the day, he knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, everything would change. The following morning, Nathaniel Carter walked through the doors of Kingston Properties once more, still wearing his janitor's uniform, still unseen by those who considered themselves more important. He had spent a full day watching his employees, listening to the way they spoke, the way they treated people they thought were beneath them. But today, he wanted more than observation. He wanted confirmation. He needed to see just how deep the culture of arrogance and entitlement had embedded itself in his company. The office buzzed with the usual morning energy, executives hurrying to meetings, agents discussing high-end property deals, assistants frantically typing away at their desks. No one paid attention to the man pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. Nathaniel stopped outside one of the smaller conference rooms, overhearing a conversation that made his stomach turn. "Honestly, I don't even know why they keep hiring people like that," one voice
This is a luxury real estate firm. We need professionals, not, well, you.
Nathaniel didn't need to see their faces to know who they were talking about. He had already noticed how certain employees were treated differently. The few black employees, the staff members who didn't come from wealth, the ones who didn't dress in designer brands. They weren't given the same respect, the same opportunities. And from the sound of it, some people didn't even think they deserved to be here. As Nathaniel turned away, the voice of one of the executives stopped him. "Hey, janitor," the man called. Nathaniel turned, keeping his expression neutral. "Yes?" The executive smirked. "Why don't you be useful and grab us some coffee?" A few of the other employees chuckled, waiting to see if he would comply. They weren't asking, they were demanding, assuming he would obey without question. Nathaniel's jaw tensed, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's not my job," he said simply. The smirk faded from the executive's face. "Excuse me?" "I said," Nathaniel repeated, his voice still even, "that's not my job." A tense silence settled in the room. No one had expected him to push back. One of the women in the group shook her head, laughing under her breath. "They really don't know their place anymore, do they?" Nathaniel took a slow breath. He had been in boardrooms with billionaires, had shaken hands with world leaders, had built a company worth hundreds of millions. And yet, in this moment, these people saw him as nothing. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because by the end of the day, every single one of them would learn exactly who he was. Nathaniel spent the rest of the morning watching, taking note of the power dynamics within the company. He saw how certain employees were treated with immediate respect, while others had to prove themselves just to be acknowledged. He watched managers belittle their subordinates, ignore their contributions, and take credit for work they hadn't done. He watched how some people were treated like they didn't belong, simply because of their background. And then, finally, he had seen enough. Nathaniel glanced at his watch. Just a few more hours. By tomorrow morning, Kingston Properties would never be the same again. Nathaniel Carter had spent the entire morning in disguise, observing the very people who worked for him. He had seen arrogance, entitlement, and a shocking lack of respect, not just toward him, but toward anyone who didn't fit the corporate image that certain employees believed the company should uphold. He had listened to their words, watched their actions, and taken note of every single person who abused their power. Now, it was time to take control. As lunchtime approached, Nathaniel stepped into the janitor's closet, removed his work uniform, and changed into a crisp, tailored navy blue suit. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, and exhaled slowly. The moment he stepped out of this room, the charade was over. With purposeful strides, he walked toward the main conference room. The employees were gathering for a midday meeting, completely unaware that the man they had been dismissing for the past 2 days was about to address them as their CEO. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. A few employees barely glanced up before going back to their conversations. Others looked at him with mild confusion, recognizing him but not fully understanding why he was in a suit. Then, the executives, Kevin Matthews included, turned and saw him. Kevin's smirk faltered for the first time. Nathaniel walked to the front of the room and clasped his hands together. "Good afternoon, everyone." His voice carried effortlessly, immediately demanding attention. A few employees exchanged glances. Some straightened in their seats, sensing that something was off. "I'm sure many of you don't recognize me," Nathaniel continued, letting the tension build. "After all, just yesterday I was wearing a janitor's uniform." The silence in the room became suffocating. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the realization dawned on them. "My name," Nathaniel said, his voice as sharp as steel, "is Nathaniel Carter. I am the owner and CEO of Kingston Properties." Gasps. Shock. The very same people who had looked down on him just hours ago were now staring at him in horror. Kevin Matthews, who had spent the last 2 days mocking Nathaniel and treating him as if he were nothing, went pale. Amanda Whitmore, the supervisor who had taken pleasure in humiliating him, clasped her hands together as if hoping she could disappear into the floor. Nathaniel let the weight of the moment settle. He made eye contact with every single person who had belittled him, every single one who had ignored, insulted, or dismissed him. "I came here undercover," he continued, his voice unwavering, "because I wanted to see for myself the culture that has been allowed to fester in this company. What I found was unacceptable." He took a step forward. "I watched employees mistreat their colleagues. I saw managers abuse their authority. I witnessed discrimination, arrogance, and a complete lack of respect for the very values this company was built upon." His gaze locked onto Kevin, who was now gripping the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "And now, changes will be made." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Nathaniel straightened his shoulders. "Effective immediately, certain individuals will no longer be employed at Kingston Properties." Gasps erupted in the room. Employees looked around nervously, wondering who would be the first to go. Nathaniel turned toward Kevin and Amanda. "Kevin Matthews, Amanda Whitmore." The two stiffened. "You're fired!" The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of Nathaniel Carter's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. The room remained silent, save for the sound of Amanda Whitmore's sharp intake of breath and the nervous shifting of Kevin Matthews. The two of them, so confident in their authority just moments ago, were now frozen in place, the reality of their situation sinking in. I don't understand," Amanda stammered, her voice unusually meek. She glanced around the room as if hoping for some kind of support. "This is a mistake." Kevin, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to argue. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting to his colleagues, searching for someone to defend him, but no one spoke. They all knew what they had seen. Nathaniel didn't flinch. His expression remained unreadable as he took a slow step forward. "A mistake?" His voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "No, Amanda. What happened over the last 2 days was not a mistake. It was a revelation." He turned, addressing the entire room. "I walked into this company, my company, without a title, without a suit, without a name that carried weight. And what I experienced was not just disrespect, but a fundamental failure in leadership. The people in charge, the very individuals meant to set the standard, were the ones tearing others down." Kevin swallowed hard. "Sir, if I had known—" Nathaniel cut him off with a raised hand. "That's the point, Kevin. You didn't know who I was, so you treated me like I was nothing. You assumed my value based on the clothes I wore, the position I held. And that assumption, that arrogance, is why you will never step foot in this building again." Kevin's face turned red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Amanda's hands clenched at her sides. "Mr. Carter, please," she tried again. "I was only following company policy." Nathaniel's lips twitched, something between amusement and disgust flashing in his eyes. "Company policy? Tell me, Amanda, which company policy says you should throw coffee on an employee? Which company policy encourages belittling your staff?" Amanda had no answer. She shrank back, her mouth pressing into a thin line. Nathaniel exhaled and addressed the rest of the room. "This is bigger than Kevin or Amanda. The behavior I witnessed is a reflection of something deeper. The truth is, companies don't fall apart because of 1 or 2 bad employees. They fall apart because good people stay silent, because those who see injustice choose to look away." A few employees lowered their heads in shame. Others looked up, as if realizing for the first time that they had been complicit. Nathaniel's voice softened, but his authority never wavered. "This company will not be one of those places. Moving forward, Kingston Properties will not tolerate discrimination, power abuse, or toxicity in the workplace. There will be new policies in place, and those who cannot uphold the values we stand for will not be here." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Some were relieved. Others were nervous about what this meant for them. Nathaniel turned back to Kevin and Amanda. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." 2 security guards stepped forward, and the 2 disgraced employees had no choice but to comply. Nathaniel watched as they walked out, their heads hanging low. Then he looked back at the people who remained. "Now," he said, his voice firm but steady. "Let's rebuild this company the right way." Nathaniel Carter stood at the front of the room, scanning the faces of his employees. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, but he remained composed. Kevin and Amanda were gone, escorted out of the building by security, but the problem didn't leave with them. Their actions were just symptoms of something much deeper, a culture that had been left unchecked for far too long. He had come here to uncover the truth, and now that he had, there was no turning back. He let the silence stretch, allowing everyone to sit with the reality of what had just happened. Some employees looked ashamed, others nervous. A few seemed relieved, as if a long-standing weight had finally been lifted. Nathaniel knew that what he did next would define the future of Kingston Properties. "I want to make one thing clear," he finally said, his voice steady but resolute. "This is not about revenge. It's not about humiliating anyone or proving a point. This is about accountability, and accountability does not end with Kevin and Amanda." A murmur passed through the crowd, quiet but unmistakable. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked away. Nathaniel continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. What happened here over the last few days was unacceptable, but it wasn't isolated. It wasn't just two bad employees. It was a system that allowed their behavior to flourish. That stops today. His words carried weight, settling into the minds of those who had remained silent while Kevin and Amanda acted with impunity. He saw the guilt on their faces, the realization that they too had played a part, either by participating in the toxic culture or by doing nothing to stop it. "I don't expect perfection," Nathaniel went on, "but I do expect growth. I expect integrity, and I expect every single one of you to ask yourselves a simple question. If I had known who he was, would I have treated him differently?" More shifting, more averted gazes. He had them thinking now, truly thinking. Because if your answer is yes, then that means you knew what you were doing was wrong. That means you understood at some level that what you were allowing to happen was unjust, and that means you have a choice to make. The room was utterly still, waiting for him to continue. "This company is going to change," he said firmly. "We are implementing new policies, real ones, not the kind that sit in a handbook and collect dust. Leadership training will be mandatory. So will inclusivity workshops and bias training. Promotions will no longer be handed out based on favoritism, but on merit, on character, on actual leadership skills." For the first time, a few employees lifted their heads, interest sparking in their eyes. They had seen how things had been run under Kevin and Amanda. They had felt the weight of an unjust system. And now, for the first time in years, they saw an opportunity for real change. "This will not be easy," Nathaniel admitted. "It will require effort from every single one of you. But if you are not willing to be part of that change, if you do not want to work in a company that values respect, integrity, and fairness, then this is your chance to walk away." A long pause. No one moved. Nathaniel nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." Nathaniel Carter stood in the conference room, looking at the people who had once dismissed him as just another janitor. The weight of the last few days hung heavy in the air, a silent reminder of everything that had unfolded. He had seen firsthand how the company his father built had been tainted by arrogance, favoritism, and prejudice. Now, standing before his employees as their new CEO, he knew his job wasn't just about making decisions, it was about setting a new standard. He exhaled, stepping forward with purpose. "I know many of you are still processing what happened," he began, his voice even but firm. "And some of you may be wondering why I went undercover, why I put myself in a position where I was ridiculed, disrespected, and treated as less than. Let me tell you why." The room was utterly still, every set of eyes locked on him, waiting. "I did it because I needed to see the truth for myself. I needed to understand, not from behind a desk, not from reports, but from experience. And what I found was unacceptable." Murmurs passed through the crowd, some shifting in their seats, others looking down, knowing they had played a part in the toxic culture that had festered in the company. Nathaniel continued, "This company is supposed to be built on excellence, but what
I saw was a place where power was abused, where those who were different were looked down upon, where hard work and character were overshadowed by office politics and favoritism. That ends today. A few employees straightened up at that, sensing the shift in leadership was real, that things would no longer operate under the unspoken rules of the past. I understand that change is difficult, Nathaniel acknowledged, and I'm not here to burn this place to the ground, but I am here to rebuild it into something better, a place where people are valued for their contributions, not for who they know or what they look like. There was a pause, the air thick with anticipation.
That means accountability, he said. Kevin and Amanda are gone. They were obvious examples of the problem. But they weren't the only ones. Some of you stood by and watched as they humiliated others. Some of you participated. And some of you stayed silent because you felt powerless to speak up. I'm not here to judge you for the past. I'm here to tell you that from this moment forward, you have a choice. You can be part of the problem, or you can be part of the solution. The gravity of his words settled over the room. There were those who looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally say what needed to be said. Others looked uneasy, uncertain about what this meant for them. Nathaniel's voice softened slightly, but it remained firm. No one here is perfect. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect change. We will be implementing new policies, not just words on paper, but real, actionable steps. Leadership will be held to a higher standard. Promotions will be based on merit. And most importantly, this company will be a place where people are treated with respect, no matter their role, no matter their background. For the first time since he started speaking, a shift occurred. Some of the employees who had been hesitant now nodded, understanding that this wasn't just talk. It was a new beginning. Nathaniel straightened. This is your opportunity, your chance to be part of something better. If you don't want that, if you refuse to be part of the solution, then this is your moment to leave. Silence. No one moved. Nathaniel let the moment hang before nodding. Good. Now, let's get to work. Nathaniel Carter stood by the window of his new office, looking out over the city skyline. The weight of everything that had happened over the past few days pressed down on him. His father's company, his company, had been rotting from the inside, poisoned by arrogance, prejudice, and unchecked power. He had seen it firsthand, had felt the sting of disrespect from people who had no idea they were belittling the man who would soon hold their futures in his hands. Now he had the power to set things right. The question was, where to begin? A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Linda, the one employee who had shown kindness during his undercover days, stepped in hesitantly. "Sir, she began, but Nathaniel waved her in. "Come in, Linda," he said, his tone softer than it had been in the conference room. "And drop the sir. You're one of the few people here who actually treated me like a person." She offered a small smile but still looked uncertain. "I just wanted to say, I never imagined things would turn out like this. I mean, I knew there were problems, but I didn't think anyone in leadership would care enough to do something about it." Nathaniel turned to face her fully. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "The people in charge either didn't see it or didn't care, but I do." Linda hesitated before speaking again. "What happens now?" Nathaniel exhaled. "Now we fix it. We rebuild. But not just with policies and mission statements that look good on paper. Real change. It starts with the leadership. No more favoritism. No more unchecked power. No more employees getting stepped on because they don't fit some outdated image of who belongs here." Linda nodded, something like hope flickering in her eyes. "That won't be easy." "No, it won't," Nathaniel agreed. "But nothing worth doing ever is." She looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Then I'm in, whatever you need." Nathaniel smiled for the first time that day. "I was hoping you'd say that." As she left, he turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. This was the moment where everything changed. Not just for him, but for the company, for every employee who had ever felt overlooked, for every person who had worked twice as hard just to be seen. The world had tried to put him in a box, had tried to tell him where he belonged. But Nathaniel Carter wasn't here to fit into anyone's expectations. He was here to lead. And now, nothing would stand in his way. Nathaniel Carter stood at the head of the conference table, his gaze sweeping across the room filled with employees who had once dismissed him. The weight of the moment pressed against the silence, thick with anticipation, unease, and for some, fear. The truth had been revealed, and the illusion of control that men like Kevin Matthews and Amanda Whitmore had built was now shattered. They weren't the ones holding the power anymore. He was. The employees sat frozen, their eyes shifting nervously, waiting for him to speak. Nathaniel had spent years studying leadership, watching his father, analyzing business strategies, understanding what made companies thrive. But what he had learned most in his time undercover was that leadership wasn't just about strategy or profits. It was about people. And the people in this company had been broken by a toxic culture that allowed cruelty to go unchecked. He placed both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "This company was built to be something great," he said, his voice calm but firm. But somewhere along the way, it lost its way. Not because of numbers or bad business decisions, because of the people running it. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Some people looked down at their hands. Others stole glances at Kevin and Amanda, whose faces were now pale with realization. "I spent the last week as a janitor," Nathaniel continued, his voice unwavering. "And in that time, I saw who you really are. Some of you treated me like I didn't matter, like my presence here was a joke. You saw my uniform and assumed I was less than you." He turned his gaze toward Amanda, who flinched slightly. "Some of you went out of your way to humiliate me, to remind me of my place. You thought you had power." He let the words settle before adding, "But real power isn't about stepping on people beneath you. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching." A few employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew they had been part of the problem, whether by action or by silence. Nathaniel straightened, allowing the weight of his words to linger. "Change is coming. Effective immediately, there will be a full review of how this company operates. Policies will be rewritten. Leadership will be held accountable. Promotions will be based on merit, not favoritism. And discrimination, in any form, will not be tolerated." He saw a flicker of relief in some faces, those who had felt powerless for too long. Then, turning toward Kevin and Amanda, he added, "For those who think this is unfair, let me remind you, fairness was never something you believed in when you had the power." Kevin opened his mouth as if to protest, but one sharp glance from Nathaniel silenced him. Amanda swallowed hard, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "This isn't just about me," Nathaniel said, looking at everyone in the room. "This is about building something better. This is about making sure no one who works here ever has to feel like they don't belong." The room remained silent, but something had shifted. Change wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The story of Nathaniel Carter is not just about revenge or exposing corruption. It's about transformation, justice, and the power of standing up for what is right. His journey from being dismissed as an unimportant janitor to reclaiming his rightful place as CEO serves as a powerful reminder that true leadership is not determined by title, wealth, or appearance. It is defined by integrity, fairness, and the courage to challenge a broken system. Too often, power is wielded by those who believe they are above accountability. Kevin Matthews and Amanda Whitmore operated under the illusion that their positions gave them control over others, that they could demean, manipulate, and crush the spirits of those they considered beneath them without consequence. But power built on arrogance and cruelty is always temporary. Eventually, it collapses under the weight of its own corruption. Nathaniel did not just strip them of their jobs. He stripped them of the illusion that they could treat others with disrespect and never face repercussions. This story is also a lesson about the dangers of assumption. The employees at Kingsley Enterprises assumed they knew who Nathaniel was based on his uniform, his silence, and the way he carried himself. They never stopped to consider that the man they ridiculed was observing, analyzing, and taking note of every action, every insult, every moment of disrespect. It makes you wonder, how often do we judge people based on the surface? How many times have we dismissed someone without knowing their full story? The reality is, we never truly know who someone is just by looking at them. And in a world where appearances often dictate how people are treated, this lesson is more important than ever. But perhaps the most significant takeaway is this: change is possible. When Nathaniel stepped into his father's company, he didn't just expose the toxicity, he changed the culture. He didn't let his experiences make him bitter. Instead, he used them to build something better. He proved that true power is not about taking revenge, but about creating an environment where respect is the foundation of success. It's about ensuring that no one has to endure the humiliation and mistreatment that he did. This story is a call to action for all of us. Whether in the workplace, in our communities, or in everyday interactions, we must challenge the structures that allow discrimination and abuse to persist. We must hold people accountable, not just when it's convenient, but always. And most importantly, we must recognize the worth of every individual, regardless of their title, background, or appearance. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in fairness, respect, and the fight for justice, then join us. Subscribe to Civil Rights Fight and be part of a community that believes in making a difference. Because the battle for equality is far from over, and together we have the power to change the world.